The hotel shuttle rolled to a smooth stop in front of the Concorde, one of the city's most elite accommodations. Lauren stepped out, momentarily soaking in the opulence that surrounded her. Everything about the place radiated luxury, from the grand architecture to the meticulous attention to detail. A uniformed bellhop swiftly approached, efficiently collecting her bags and placing them onto a sleek luggage cart. He handed her a small claim ticket with a courteous nod before stepping aside, his movements polished and professional. As she advanced toward the entrance, the doorman, standing tall in his crisp attire, acknowledged her with a slight tip of his hat before pulling open the gleaming brass door. The bellhop followed at a respectful distance, maintaining the refined etiquette expected in such a prestigious establishment. Inside, Lauren moved toward the check-in desk, her gaze subtly drifting over the elegant lobby in search of Daniel. She had asked him to meet her here in the letter she had sent, but as she scanned the room, all she saw were clusters of guests lounging in oversized chairs and sofas, engaged in quiet conversation or lost in their own worlds. Daniel was nowhere to be found. A flicker of uncertainty crept in. Was he still too angry to see her? Their last conversation had been explosive. He had called her, voice thick with rage, while she had been in Ethan's bed in Argentina. That moment felt distant now, but the memory of it still made her uneasy. Weeks had passed since then, and she had finally let go, giving Daniel the space to do the same. She suspected that space had been filled by Samantha, their flirtatious neighbor. Samantha was the kind of woman who commanded attention effortlessly. With an open marriage and a magnetic confidence, she made it no secret that she had her sights set on Daniel. Lauren had noticed the way men in their neighborhood would steal glances as Samantha sauntered by, her presence impossible to ignore. It was only natural to assume Daniel had indulged in her advances while Lauren was gone. She just hoped whatever had happened between them was now behind him. The thought of rebuilding her marriage while Samantha still lurked in the background was more than she wanted to handle. A pang of guilt surfaced as she realized just how long it had been since she and Daniel had spoken, aside from that fiery phone call. Her days in Argentina had been relentless, filled with surgeries and back-to-back patient consultations. The rare moments of free time she had were spent exploring, capturing snapshots of the city's vibrance, Cerro San Cristobal, the historic streets, the bustling plazas, and sending them to Daniel with small notes about her experiences. He had never replied. That hurt, though she told herself it was his way of processing everything. He had always been a man of deep feelings, even when he kept them locked away. But despite it all, she knew he loved her. He always had. Their years together had been filled with challenges, yet their bond had endured. With their children grown and out of the house, they were stepping into a new phase of life, one she wanted to navigate with him. If anything, her time with Ethan had only reaffirmed that. Ethan had been thrilling at first, intense, adventurous, and utterly unapologetic in the bedroom. But love had never been part of the equation. Once Daniel had discovered the affair, the charm that had once drawn her to Ethan began to dissolve, replaced by something darker. His arrogance, initially intoxicating, became insufferable. Worse, he seemed to take pleasure in degrading her. He reveled in the power he held over her, pushing her into things she had never done with Daniel, then taunting her about it afterward. His words had started as a seductive game but quickly turned cruel, painting Daniel as a weak, humiliated man. At first, she had protested, trying to set boundaries, but Ethan only pushed further. Eventually, she stopped resisting, hoping he would grow bored of his own cruel fantasies. He never did. By the end of their trip, she felt stripped of her dignity, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with long hospital shifts. Sitting at the Buenos Aires airport, drained and hollow, she finally turned to him. "It's over," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She was done. She was going home, to fix things with Daniel. Ethan barely reacted. He simply exhaled through his nose, shrugged, and muttered that he had already grown tired of their affair. "It's for the best," he said with a dismissive smirk. His final words, "Enjoy your pathetic husband," sent a ripple of anger through her. And with that, he swapped seats with Penny, as if sitting beside Lauren for the long flight home was too much of a burden. Looking at him now, she couldn't fathom how she had ever been so drawn to him. He was nothing more than a self-absorbed bastard. And truthfully, she was relieved not to be stuck next to him for the flight. Instead, she ended up beside Penny, who, like her, was drained and uninterested in conversation. Eventually, though, Penny spoke. In hushed tones, she admitted that Daniel had called her hotel room during the trip. He had figured out that she was cheating on her husband, Josh, with one of the doctors. To Penny's relief, Daniel had promised to keep the secret. She knew Josh wouldn't be nearly as forgiving if he ever found out. But fate had its own sense of justice. At baggage claim, a young woman approached Penny with a clipped, professional tone. "Penny Washington?" she asked. Penny hesitated before nodding, only for the woman to shove a thick manila envelope into her hands. "You've been served," she announced, snapping a quick photo as proof before walking away. The realization hit Penny instantly. Her face crumpled, her breath coming in sharp gasps as the weight of it all crashed down. A few murmured words of comfort floated around her. Maybe you can talk to him, and there's still a chance to fix this. But the truth was clear. Penny's marriage was over. She eventually composed herself, but the devastation clung to her like a shadow. She kept dialing Josh's number, each attempt met with a cold, blocked line. Left with no other option, she collected her luggage and requested an Uber to her parents' house, bracing herself for whatever awaited her. As Lauren stood there, waiting for her own bags, she couldn't shake the feeling that another process server might appear, one holding divorce papers with her name on them. But none came. The longer she waited, the more convinced she became. Daniel hadn't gone through with it. Maybe he had calmed down. Maybe he had forgiven her. She clung to that hope as she made her way to the hotel. Because no matter what had happened, no matter the mistakes she had made, Daniel was still the only man she had ever truly loved. As Lauren approached the hotel's front desk, her mind drifted to thoughts of Daniel. She longed for him now more than ever. His steady presence, the little quirks that once drove her crazy, even the way he sighed when she left dishes in the sink. 6 weeks away, tangled in a destructive affair, had made her realize just how much she had taken him for granted. What she wanted now was simple, to be back in his arms, to start fresh. But first, there was something that couldn't be ignored. They would both need clean STD tests. She pushed that thought aside and focused on what mattered most, reuniting with Daniel. A part of her had secretly hoped to find him already waiting in the lobby, anticipating her arrival just as she had imagined. But as her gaze swept across the room, taking in the well-dressed guests and hushed conversations, disappointment settled in. Daniel wasn't there. Reaching the front desk, she was greeted by a young man in a sharp, tailored suit. His polished gold name tag read Diego Herrera, front desk. He looked up with a professional smile, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. "Welcome to the Concord Hotel. How may I assist you?" "I have a reservation under Lauren Baxter," she said, shifting her purse on her shoulder. Jose nodded and tapped quickly on his screen. "Ah, yes. You're booked for a single night, correct?" "Yes, just the one." He flashed another easy smile. "You'll be staying on the 10th floor. Lovely room, fantastic city view. How many key cards will you need?" She hesitated for only a moment before answering. "2, please. My husband will be joining me." "Of course," he said with a nod. "And which credit card would you like to use for the stay and any incidentals?" Lauren reached into her bag and pulled out her Visa, handing it over. "This one should work." As he swiped the card, she cast a glance toward the luggage cart where the bellboy, a young man named Steve, stood waiting with her bags. She appreciated the help. Without Daniel here yet, she would have struggled to manage them alone. Jose's expression suddenly shifted. His practiced ease faltered. "I'm sorry, Ms. Weston, but this card has been declined." A strange weight settled in her stomach. That didn't make sense. She had barely touched her credit cards in Buenos Aires. Most of her expenses had been covered by Doctors Without Borders, and when she did go out, Ethan had always picked up the tab. The only two cards she had brought were the Visa and her Discover, both of which had been locked in her room safe for security. Had someone stolen her information? She forced a steady breath. "Let's try my Discover," she said, trading out the cards. "Of course," Jose replied, offering a reassuring smile as he ran the second card. By now, another couple had queued behind her, their patience quietly thinning. Lauren felt the heat of their presence, the subtle shift in posture that signaled their growing impatience. The last thing she wanted was to be that person, the one holding up the line over a declined payment. Moments later, Jose's apologetic expression returned. "I'm sorry, but this card was also declined." A wave of embarrassment rushed through her, warm and unwelcome. "These are the only two I have with me," she admitted, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been overseas for 6 weeks, so something must have happened. Let me call my husband and sort this out." Jose nodded politely. "Of course, Ms. Weston. Let us know how we can assist once you've spoken with him." Murmuring a quick "thanks," Lauren stepped away from the counter, already fumbling in her bag for her phone. The couple behind her took her place instantly, and within moments, the bellboy had abandoned her luggage cart in favor of theirs. She suddenly felt invisible. As she powered on her phone, she realized she hadn't turned it back on since landing. Between the chaos at baggage claim and Penny's unexpected legal disaster, she had forgotten entirely. Now, as the screen blinked to life, she braced herself for a flood of missed calls and messages from Daniel. But there was nothing. No missed calls. No voicemails. No texts. Her stomach tightened. She quickly tapped on his name and pressed call, expecting to hear the usual ring, to be met with his familiar voice. Instead, a robotic message filled her ear. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected and is no longer in service." Lauren's breath caught. That had to be a mistake. Daniel wouldn't just change his number without telling her. Would he? Her fingers tightened around the phone as she stared at the screen, half expecting it to offer her an explanation. Before she could process what was happening, a man she vaguely recognized from the lobby approached. He was sharply dressed, his posture straight and assured, his steps deliberate. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth, unreadable. "Are you Lauren Baxter?" Her pulse quickened. Something about his tone sent a chill down her spine. Swallowing, she nodded. "Yes. Can I help you?" The man offered a small, neutral smile. "No, ma'am. But your husband wanted you to have this." He extended a large manila envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for it, her mind racing through possibilities. The man gave a curt nod before turning on his heel, walking toward the exit without another word. Lauren stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. He never said the words "you've been served." And he hadn't taken a photo to confirm delivery. A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Maybe this wasn't what she feared. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel had arranged some kind of surprise for her instead. She barely noticed as she crossed the room and dropped into a nearby armchair, fingers fumbling to open the envelope. Inside, she found a neatly typed letter and a smaller, stiff envelope. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she pulled out the letter. Taking a deep breath, she began to read. "Lauren, I've never been one to walk away from a fight, but I also can't pretend that your blatant betrayal of our marriage vows didn't cut me to my core. You convinced yourself that I had some torrid affair with Hannah while we were deployed in Afghanistan. I didn't. I'll admit, there was one moment that crossed the line. It happened after our convoy was ambushed by insurgents. Hannah and I barely made it back to base in one piece, unlike many of the others. The rush of adrenaline, the raw fear, and the overwhelming relief of still being alive. It was a volatile mix. After the debriefing, I walked Hannah back to her quarters, and just as I was turning to leave, she pulled me into a desperate hug, shaking, sobbing. The weight of the day had broken her. I tried to comfort her, and then she kissed me. For a fleeting moment, I kissed her back. We got lost in it, like a couple of reckless teenagers, drowning in the high of survival. I regret that moment of weakness. But that's all it was. A moment. Nothing more happened. No intimacy. No betrayal beyond that stolen kiss. It was an instinctive reaction to trauma, not a calculated series of choices. For the record, since the day we said I do, you have been the only woman I have ever been with. I doubt you can say the same. I know about Ethan, obviously. But I also know about the affair you had while I was stationed in Korea. You thought you were being careful, slipping off to the Pinecrest motel across from the hospital and blaming it on the construction. But I wasn't blind. You were there for hours before your shift. Too often for it to be a coincidence. I hired a private investigator to confirm what I already suspected. He couldn't identify the guy, but you and I both know he existed. Only you know how many others there have been. For some reason, I let the Red Roof affair slide. Maybe I told myself it was because I had been gone so long, and you just needed someone to fill the void. At least you had the decency to be discreet. At least you had the sense to stop the moment I came back. So, I swallowed my pride and buried it. But now, after seeing the version of marriage you decided we were living in, where one partner gets to rewrite the rules while the other is left in the dark, I see things differently. By the way, I never slept with Samantha. I know you thought you were doing me some kind of twisted favor by throwing her at me, but the idea disgusted me. I did, however, have Samantha and Gregory over for dinner. Funny thing, she let it slip that you had already been screwing Ethan and were looking for a way to drag me into the lifestyle. Samantha assumed I was in the loop. She was not happy when she realized you had gone behind my back. Neither was Gregory. Turns out, in the actual swinger community, honesty between spouses is the foundation of everything. Who would have guessed? Samantha and Gregory didn't approve of your selfish little escapades. And they wanted to make sure I knew. I suppose, in your new world of marriage, you decided that running things by me wasn't necessary anymore. I would have appreciated knowing that we were suddenly swingers, especially since I was the only one not participating. Since you were in Argentina, indulging in the world-class expertise of the esteemed Dr. Ethan, I figured it was only right for me to do my part to make sure you weren't being exploited. So, I took the liberty of canceling and paying off all our joint credit cards. Can't be too careful when you're in a foreign country, right? Remember when we met with that estate planning attorney a few years ago? We signed all those legal documents, our wills, living trusts, and durable power of attorney forms? I had nearly forgotten about them myself. That is, until our little phone call, while you were lying in his bed. That conversation reminded me to make some necessary updates. First, I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy. You'll be pleased to know that our children will now receive everything. Thank you for signing that POA, by the way. It worked like a charm. Once I was done, I shredded both copies, ensuring they'd never be used again. You're welcome. But I didn't stop there. I used that POA one last time. I needed it to sell our house and our cars, since, they were jointly owned. Don't worry, I got solid offers on your behalf. Remember Matthew and Jessica Carter? That sweet couple who fell in love with our house because they needed more space for their growing family? Well, it's their house now. They were overjoyed. I told them you were on an extended overseas assignment and couldn't make the closing. I'm sure they'd love to thank you. Feel free to drop by. As for my phone, I decided it was time for a change. New phone, new number, new provider. I might share the number with you someday. Now, here's the best part. I'm not divorcing you. I don't believe in divorce. And I certainly don't believe in remarrying, so there's no need. Instead, I decided to use a portion of the money from our house and car sales to hire a private investigator in Argentina. He gathered some very interesting photos and audio recordings of you and your favorite surgeon. Maybe they should consider renaming the program Doctors Without Morals. And speaking of your extracurriculars, I had no idea you were into such depravity. I really hope you stocked up on mouthwash. But it didn't seem right for me to be the only one privy to your indiscretions. So, I made sure someone else knew. I had an in-depth conversation with Ms. Reynolds, the HR director at your hospital. She was shocked by what I told her. Could hardly believe it. I informed her that I planned to take legal action against the hospital for failing to enforce the morality clause in your employment contract. An oversight that, as you know, directly led to the implosion of my marriage. I also mentioned that a courier would be delivering some highly relevant documents first thing Monday morning. These include the private investigator's full report and a carefully curated selection of, let's just call them compromising photos. To sweeten the deal, I drafted a simple agreement of my own. In exchange for dropping my lawsuit, I requested that both you and Ethan be fired for cause, and that neither of you be granted positive references for any future employment. She seemed very eager to avoid any potential liability. I have a feeling your first day back at work is going to be unforgettable. Lauren, just like you conveniently forgot to mention that our marriage had become an open arrangement before you jetted off for your 6-week getaway with Dr. Charming, I seem to have forgotten to tell you something as well. I've always dreamed of exploring this country, road by road, before I'm too old to enjoy it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm hitting the open highway, an extended trip, at least a year, maybe more, to cross off everything on my bucket list. I rented a fully loaded RV from an old military buddy, so don't waste your time trying to track me through vehicle registrations. The papers aren't in my name. Of course, a trip like this required a bit of downsizing. I kept what mattered, packed up the RV, and got rid of the rest. I could have called to ask if you wanted to keep anything, but after the last time I reached out, when you and your lover acted as if my call was some huge inconvenience, I figured it was best not to interrupt. Wouldn't want to spoil the moment. So, I handled it myself. Sold the furniture. Got rid of my tools. Donated a few of my clothes. Donated all of yours. As for the sentimental stuff, well, let's just say I had a proper farewell bonfire in the backyard. Wedding photos. Your wedding dress. Every picture of us together. Gone. I did keep the photos of the kids. That only seemed fair. By the way, burning pictures creates a lot more smoke than you'd think. Frank from next door actually came over, concerned about the flames. I told him I was just saying goodbye to a few things. Just once, if you don't mind. He didn't mind at all. Now that our relationship is officially open, I won't feel the slightest bit guilty about welcoming some company along the way. Lucky for me, the military kept me in top shape, and judging by Samantha's comments, I shouldn't have much trouble finding new friends on the road. I filled the kids in on everything. Your affairs, my plans, the whole mess. They were upset, but they understood. They asked me to stay in touch while I travel, which I agreed to, on one condition. They are not to share my new number with you. They promised they wouldn't. But don't worry, Lauren. I'll check in with you just as often as you checked in with me while you were tangled up with Ethan in Argentina. I think I forgot to mention to them that the number was 0. I leave today, the very day you got back. Poetic, don't you think? But don't worry, this is just a one-time trip for me, if you don't mind. Now, about finances. The open road can get expensive, so I took care of that too. I helped myself to some travel funds. Every penny from our joint accounts? Mine. The cash from selling the house and cars? Also mine. I did leave your retirement account untouched. I'm not completely heartless. As for mine, I cashed it out. Took the early withdrawal penalty. Worth every cent. Funny how embracing your new version of marriage really opens your eyes to new possibilities. I'll understand if this arrangement eventually loses its charm for you. Maybe you and Dr. Ethan can finally make it official. If you want a divorce, you're free to file on the grounds of abandonment. I won't contest it. But I won't file on the grounds of infidelity, even though we both know that would be more accurate. Truth is, I've already taken everything I wanted from this marriage. 2 incredible kids, a handful of good memories, and a fat stack of cash. Oh, And let's not forget those digital copies of the photos my private investigator took in Argentina. It didn't seem fair for me to be the only one to see them. So, I shared them. Family, friends, colleagues. I made sure no one thought I just ran off without a reason. I even sent a few choice shots to every email in both of our contact lists. And because I'm such a considerate man, I CC'd you, so you'll know exactly what I shared. You'll see it next time you log in. Oh, and before I forget, inside the smaller envelope, you'll find a $1,000 Visa gift card. Consider it a parting gift. Don't say I never gave you anything. This is the last you'll ever hear from me. I'm sending this letter. Just once, if you don't mind. Lauren's hands trembled as her eyes scanned the final words, her pulse hammering in her ears. With unsteady fingers, she tore open the smaller envelope. There it was. A crisp, untouched $1,000 Visa gift card. A taunt. A last, brutal slap in the face. Her entire world had collapsed in mere moments. Her home gone. Her cars gone. Her marriage obliterated. Her career hanging by a thread. Her reputation shattered. Her bank accounts drained. Daniel hadn't just left her. He had erased her. Everything she had taken for granted, every comfort, every security, had been wiped away. And there was no undoing it. A sharp gasp tore from her throat as panic coiled inside her, constricting her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her gaze darted wildly across the lobby, searching for someone, anyone, a familiar face, a lifeline. But there was no one. She was completely, utterly alone. For the first time in her life, Lauren understood what it felt like to be abandoned. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed back the sob clawing its way up. Crying wouldn't change anything. Daniel had played the game flawlessly. And he had won.